Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Great to have you with us, whether you're watching or listening. Coming up on the show today, I'll be joined by Warren Davies. He's known as the Unbreakable Farmer. He's also a writer and a keynote speaker and podcaster. He shines a light on capacity building, resilience and recovery in the face of natural disasters and setbacks, particularly in the context of the recent Victorian bushfires. We'll be chatting with Warren. Councillor Steve Rabie in Mansfield, a community dealing with impacts from bushfires, of course, will be here to talk about issues affecting his community, including the 12-month anniversary of the Emergency Services Volunteer Fund levy and that council's opposition to the levy, and the state government planning reforms. He has a bit to say about those issues, unfair policies, he calls them, impacting rural Victoria. And I'll have Tony Raunic joining me a little later from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. We have two arbiter decisions to unpack. He'll tell us what happened and what lessons can be learned from the outcomes. But first, let's catch up on this week's Connect News. Southern Grampians Shire Councillor Katrina Rainsford has been suspended for 1 month, effective February 11. An independent arbiter found that Councillor Rainsford engaged in misconduct, breaching the Councillor Code of Conduct on 6 separate occasions between May and July last year. Tony Raunic will help us unpack that decision and the Greater Bendigo decision that I told you about last week a little later in the show. Mansfield Shire Council has apologised after discovering a costly administrative blunder spanning more than a decade. The council revealed this week that it overcharged drivers on parking fines between 2009 and 2019, collecting around $34,000 more than it should have. Eligible drivers will be contacted directly as the council works through its refund scheme. Murrindindi Shire Council is calling for urgent support after January's bushfires destroyed 193 homes, nearly half of Victoria's total losses. Mayor Damien Gallagher is seeking a 2-month extension to the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry submission deadline. And the council also wants to see locally delivered mental health services, warning that the current $6.9 million funding model requires travel up to 2.5 hours away. Mornington Peninsula Shire's Mayor Anthony Marsh has confirmed that he has formally applied for Liberal Party pre-selection ahead of the upcoming by-election in the state seat of Nepean. The party is scheduled to decide on its candidate next week. Maribyrnong Council has ended its 6-month security trial in Footscray. It was launched in September, pairing private security guards with local law officers for joint patrols after a series of serious incidents. This week, the council voted to shift away from the security-led approach towards a civic presence model. In Brimbank, the council is reporting significant progress in its crackdown on illegal trading in St Albans, a nearly 50% reduction in just 3 months. The council has combined compliance officers, community engagement and education to tackle the problem. But Mayor Virginia Takos says more help is needed, calling on the state government to boost police numbers in Brimbank. Cardinia Shire has hit the brakes on the Victorian government's proposed 4th household bin for glass-only recycling. They're calling for more time to assess the plan. Mayor Brett Owen said at this week's council meeting the additional bin would cost households an extra $27 a year, but wouldn't significantly reduce waste to landfill, I should say. Let's go to Mansfield again now, where I caught up recently with Mayor Steve Rabie for his thoughts on a petition against state planning reforms that didn't get the response his community was hoping for. Please note this conversation was recorded on the 12-month anniversary of the council's stand against the ESVF tax, and it was before the news broke about the parking fine error that I mentioned a few moments ago, which is why I don't ask him about it. Let's hear now from Mansfield Mayor Steve Rabie. Mayor Rabie joins me now. Hello, Steve. Good to see you.
G'day, Chris. It's great to be on yet again in my third term.
Yes, well, always happy to have you and never a shortage of things to talk about. Just quickly, how are things after the bushfires? I know, Murrindindi probably copped it more than Mansfield, but there was some impact there, wasn't there?
Yeah, sure. We had thousands of hectares burnt. The economic impact to the Shire was great, given that there was the advice to leave early, which a lot of people did do. The roads were closed, obviously. So the economic impact to the Mansfield Shire during that time was fairly significant.
Yeah.
But our hearts and prayers go out with those people that lost a lot of their income, their cattle, their sheep, and a lot of their farmlands were burnt. So we're now in the recovery and repair stage. So we're very keen to support our community as best we can during this time.
Yes, Steve, it sort of brings it home, doesn't it? You've been talking about the Emergency Services Volunteer Fund for over 12 months now. Do you still see it as a debacle and an unfair tax when we've seen, obviously, the emergency services come to the fore in recent times?
Now, Chris, my view is that it is an unfair tax. It's essentially completely wrong. The way that it was brought out years ago, and the history of this was that it was basically the same amount of money for everyone. I think it was $130 or whatever. That's now increased exponentially through years and years of quite significant percentage increases. I think the tax was unfairly targeted at landowners, and let's face it, I think this tax is a tax on the wealthy, although I don't see farmers being wealthy. Maybe they are on paper, they might own a few thousand acres, but that wealth is only in land only, which is passed down through generations to keep feeding people. I mean, let's face it, we're feeding Victorians here. So I think it's an unfair tax. It's last Saturday was the 12-month anniversary of Mansfield Shire voting unanimously. And we have quite a cross bench of political spectrum here in Mansfield. So they voted unanimously to oppose this tax, which we continue to do.
And you've just put out some figures showing that your commercial businesses, small businesses, are bearing a 70% increase as a result of the way this has been implemented.
Sure has. There's one business in town that's a not-for-profit business, an end-of-life not-for-profit business. They have a recycle shop, and their increase, they paid $1,000 last year because they're a commercial business, or they lease a commercial space. They paid $1,000 year before, and then just this last time it went to 2,000. So they ended up having to break that lease and move over the road where it was a cheaper lease. They just couldn't support. It couldn't be supported. So I mean, that's just unfair in every way that a not-for-profit gets slugged with something as unfair as that. So it's on record, the government know that we're not in support of that. Funnily enough, and I don't want to go on a tangent here, but Mansfield Shire is probably one of the very few shires that are actually in support of the rate cap. So, it's not as if we're against this Labor government. What we're saying is, and any government that comes in, we will act in the best interest of the ratepayer in Mansfield.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've certainly been vocal about it and continuing the fight. The other issue you've been vocal on is the planning reforms. You've called it a Melbourne-centric model that's being imposed on rural communities. A petition went through to the Legislative Council, but it didn't get the impact that you were looking for.
No, the deals have been done, the background deals have been done, it had gone through the upper house. Very disappointed in the Marijuana Party voting that through. Very, very disappointed, given that most of what they smoke probably comes from the country. So, just it is Melbourne centric, and I'm not being disrespectful to Melbourne at all about this. A lot of people come from Melbourne and they want to come up into the country and enjoy the environs here, and they drive through the main street of Mansfield, and isn't it beautiful? Well, yes, it is beautiful because we've got different planning laws here than you had in Melbourne. Now we've all got the same planning law. There's been a blanket approach to planning. I think there could have been, a little more thought put into the way that this was enacted. I think that the planning minister should have come to and at least asked us. And we have letters to and from senior people within her department that point to the fact that there was no consultation with country CEOs over this. We've got it's proof. We've got proof of it. So to say that you were consulted, everyone's happy with this. Well, we're not. I think in Melbourne, I understand there's a cost of living crisis, obviously, and there's a population crisis,
a housing crisis.
Yeah. And I understand that the government have to do something about that. That's their responsibility. But to have a blanket approach that impacts small rural shires, that could, we could have a 4-story concrete building in the main street of Mansfield to house people. Where does this come from? It's just not.
Have you any reason to believe yet that something like that is on foot? Have there been any implications, or is it too early to say?
Too early to say, but that is what the planning law says. You can do that. So the other thing that I don't like about it is that someone could wake up in the morning, 8 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning, and there'll be a 30-ton excavator working next door. And so what's going on here? Well, we're building, 2-story building to house people. They don't get a say. And for a government that's a Labor government, it's really disappointing that they're not listening to everyone. That's the basis of what, when I grew up in the 70s, where I was a plumber when I left school. So, I worked with my hands. I was very involved in all sorts of Labor sort of movements when I was young. But I just don't see that it's, they've lost their way in the fact that they're not listening. And I think that's what I really like about local government. I love the fact that, especially Mansfield, that we listen. We listen and we act. But I wish the government would listen to us a bit more.
Still calling it as you see it, Steve, which is always refreshing. I understand. I've heard from a reliable source that you've been seen online consorting with a tractor and a dog. Tell me what that's all about.
Yeah, I did a video last Thursday. I bought a selfie stick, so I'm a modern man now. At 65, coming up to 65, I've got into the modern ways of the world, and I bought a selfie stick, and I did this video, and I forgot the dog. I always take the dog with me in the tractor, and the dog was sitting up on the floor of the tractor, and someone said, "Oh, your dog jumped up and sat on your tractor chair." And Steve, the video is so boring, the dog went to sleep. So look at it. It's on Councillor Steve Rabie's Facebook page. And it's also posted on our Mansfield Shire webpage as well. It's a pretty funny video.
We'll definitely be checking that out. Steve, you're always generous with your time. Thanks very much. I know you're busy there on the farm and with council business, so all the best to you. Hopefully we can talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. See ya.
Mayor of Mansfield, Steve Rabie there, and that wraps up this week's edition of Connect News. Don't forget, for more of the latest on what's happening around the sector, listen to the local government news roundup, brought to you by the VLGA and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Well, we have talked a bit on the program already this year about the impact of bushfires around various parts of the state. And we want to talk to someone who's been involved in how this is impacting on people, particularly their mental health today. And I'm joined by Warren Davies, who's known as the Unbreakable farmer. And we discovered, Warren, in our pre-chat before recording that we sort of go way back to those days in the Goulburn Valley when I was on telly and you were a kid watching I guess it was the Sixers Super Saturday show, was it?
That's it, mate. That's a bit of a blast from the past when I seen your face. So that's great to be speaking with you today, Chris. And yeah, look forward to our chat.
Good to have you here. Now, you're talking to us from Kyabram, where you are currently, but you've been in various parts of the state over the years.
Yes, yeah, moved around a little bit. So grew up in Melbourne and then moved to the country to a little place between Kyabram and Shepparton called Merrigum, and then bought my own farm over in Tonny, and yes, and since then moved around a little bit, but pretty much always been based in Kyabram since. So yeah, Goulburn Valley boy through and through now. I think I'm a local after being here for 40 odd years.
I'm sure you are. Great part of the world, of course. I know it well. So the bushfires this year, we got off to a pretty rough start in some parts of the state. We spoke to Toby Hayden from Mount Alexander on a recent episode. A town there particularly almost completely devastated, people dealing with the aftermath of that. Tell us a bit about the work that you do in this space, Warren.
Yeah, so as you said, the year probably didn't start off the way I thought it would, and straight into it working. So I'm a mental health advocate and speaker, but I've worked pretty heavily in the disaster recovery space over the last 6 years, from the drought leading into the bushfires and then into the floods, and done disaster recovery work all around Australia as a mental health speaker. And I've got a real connection to the Murrumbidgee Shire in particular. I'm the ambassador for the Alexandra Truck Show, and I've spent a lot of time over there. So when the fire hit, as soon as I could get in there, I headed over, and we'd actually launched a couple of days before the fires the Murrumbidgee Health Van, which was community-led initiative, fully funded by the community, and then Jerry Ryan from JCO jumped on board, and we actually have got a fully fledged RV on the road that's a mental health van. So I went and manned that in Rotary Park in Alexandra from basically day one, and to try and use some of that knowledge that I've got in the disaster recovery space to be able to support people through what is a pretty challenging time, particularly, in those initial days, because a lot of people were in shell shock. So, and since then, I've been doing a lot of outreach work, just dropping in, seeing farmers, doing welfare checks and making sure they're doing okay, having conversations with them, which is most important, just connecting and communicating and making sure that they're not feeling alone and isolated, which is one of the big things that are probably playing out in this disaster compared to some of the others that I've worked in. It was from day one where people were feeling that, shell shocked, feeling alone, what next kind of thing.
Yeah. How did you get into this space, Warren? I assume it was through an adversity of your own that you faced?
Yeah, well, basically, and I say this, literally fell into the space after losing my own farm, my own dairy farm in the millennial drought. We ended up having to walk off our farm. I was searching for my purpose and identity, because the day I left my farm, I symbolically unclipped my identity off myself and left it on the farm gate, because that's who I thought I was, Warren the farmer. And over the next few years was searching for that purpose and identity, and basically always went back to farming because I could do that well. So I managed big dairy farms, did a few other little things, like I worked for Kevin Hicks in Shep there for a few years doing real estate, and learnt lots from that. And basically being that real estate agent sowed the seeds of what I do now, because I basically wasn't a real estate agent. I became a counsellor, because you'd sit around kitchen tables with people wanting to sell their farms and dealing with 3Ds basically every day, and that was death, divorce, or drought. And then so you ended up, counselling them. And then so the next iteration of Warren was I did a speaker course and just did that for self-development, but I've fallen into this mental health space by storytelling, sharing my story, but also the strategies and tools that I've learned along the way, share them with people to try and fill their toolboxes to be able to help them navigate their own journeys.
And you have an excellent blog and podcast series, etc., and we'll pop those links into the show notes so people can find those after our chat. Warren, let's get back to the current situation. Flurry of activity in those early days. You've talked about the invisible impact of these events, and particularly what happens after that adrenaline phase. What do you mean by the invisible impact on people?
There's lots of invisible things that, once the news cycle finishes and, everything doesn't get back to normal in those communities, but for the rest of the world, it does. And, there's a lot of, stuff to navigate, post disaster when you're, particularly if you've lost your home or, particularly in most of the fires that have happened in Victoria this year have all really heavily impacted farming and agriculture. So, you've got loss of stock and loss of buildings and loss of income, and all these things are really huge to navigate on top of what you've just been through, just even processing the disaster that you've been through. So there's a lot of invisible phases, and one of those, and we talked offline, is the administration side of disaster and dealing with the paperwork, and I can really empathize with that, because I can remember in the midst of the millennial drought being handed a 10-page document to fill in to get some drought relief, and I just had no capability to be able to do that. I was, totally overwhelmed with the situation I was in, let alone fill out a form. So I can really empathise with the people that I'm seeing on the ground at the moment. There's a couple of other factors, particularly in this Longwood fire ground, that I've identified as well, and that's the age of the farmer and their ability to be able to access, everything's online these days, so being able to access the support that they need. We need to add another layer of support for those people. So, the outreach work that's going to be required within this disaster recovery is going to be a lot greater, I think, than other disasters, because people aren't going to come to where the support is. We're going to have to take the support to them.
Yeah. This administrative burden issue, I'm really interested to unpack a little bit more, given our audience, and that issue you've just raised of the age of the farmer and perhaps the technological skill level. What can councils or community leaders do to try and address that issue? Is it just something we have to bear, or is there a better way to do
Look,
it?
I think one of the hardest things, and I was having this discussion yesterday. I was in Molesworth yesterday with someone, and it was about, like, it's something that won't be funded, and that's the unfortunate part about it, because there's no KPIs or measures that you can apply to spending a couple of hours with a person and helping navigate that journey. So it's really hard to fund that. So a lot of this is just extra above and beyond, and I know the burden that then puts on, people that work in local government. That's an extra burden. Having said that, the community, and obviously where I've been doing most of my work, the Murrumbidgee Shire, they've done an amazing job with community hubs. The community have stood those up straight after the fires, in communities like Highlands and Ruffy and Terrap and down in Fawcett and at Yark. They've stood up their own community hubs. And now those services are starting to roll out into those hubs. The thing that concerns me is that those people that aren't attending those hubs and how we identify them. So I think one of the roles that local government can have is, really finding out who are the people that are missing or missing those community hubs or slipping through the cracks, and being able to work out, well, how can we support those people because they're there. They're just not attending. If the local government or the federal or state government services come through town, they're not there. How do we identify them, and then how do we outreach to them? And I think that's a lot of that comes down to local knowledge, knowing who your people are and who's missing.
And what about that longer term, Warren, after the media moves on to the next event in the cycle and those external agencies move on to other things? This is where we get into how resilient those communities are, isn't it? And I heard you talk, if I can quote you, resilience isn't a starting point, it's an outcome, but it seems to me like it's an ongoing cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I talk about now is that I've really got through my own journey, got a fractured relationship with resilience, because resilience, particularly in this disaster recovery space, looks to me like someone comes in, pats you on the back, congratulating you for suffering really well, and just continue what you're doing well. Where I now talk about capacity before crisis or during or after crisis, and how can we build tools in our toolbox that we can lean on to be able to help us navigate that journey, so then we can tap into our resilience. And so it's the capacity is that step before. Resilience is that outcome of that capacity, because if you have no capacity, you really can't tap into that resilience. And for myself in my journey, I explain that is, I picked myself up and dusted myself off numerous occasions, through a flood, family bust up, drought, all those things. Eventually I ran out of dust because I didn't have that robust toolbox that was accompanying that resilience. So I think we really got to take it back a step and start building some tools and strategies in people's toolboxes, so that helps support them or builds a framework that supports them through this journey, because this isn't going to be a 6-week journey or a 6-month journey. It's going to move into the years kind of journey, because the impact has been so great.
Where do local councils sit in that process, in your view? And have you seen good and bad examples of how councils can support that process?
Look, on the ground, there's mixed feelings, but obviously most of the work that I've done is in the Murrumbidgee Shire, and I believe they've done an exceptional job. The mayor, the deputy mayor, the executive team have been working tirelessly over the last month, basically without break, to be able to support their community. Obviously, within pockets in those communities, there is a little bit of unrest, but that's where that outreach aspect really works well. If you can be present in those communities and rest them, assure them that someone's got their back and you're there to support them. I think that's the role, that local government really can play a big part in going forward into this recovery.
I have noticed in the Murrumbidgee example, the mayor fronting up on Facebook every day with an update, community meetings, etc. How important is that information dissemination? Does that reach a point where people just don't want to hear anymore? They just want to get on with life?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and it's been particularly moving from the initial response phase into this recovery phase. I think that information is still really important, because every day there's something else on the ground that is there to support another agency or different funding that you can apply for. So letting those people know and be aware of, well, this is where it is, this is how you can apply for it, is really important. So providing that information, I think, is really important up front, and letting people know where everything is, particularly in that initial phase, because there was a lot of, to use a better word, but chaos, because there was a lot of road closures, there was a lot of access difficulties, there might have been communication difficulties with towers but having to be fueled to be able to to keep the network up and running. So making people aware of where everything was at was really important. And I think going, and particularly using the Murrumbidgee example, going above and beyond, I believe your role in providing that information day in, day out has been exceptional. And, you see that right across the state. You see other shires doing the same thing. But I think making sure that those outlying communities within your shire are feeling that same love is really important.
Yeah, and shout out to those other areas down in Colac Otway area. They've had flash flood as well as fires to deal with, and the same things are playing out on the ground
But I'm
there.
I'm seeing the same thing on social media. Those communities that have been standing up their own community hubs and supporting their community until that the support starts rolling out.
Yeah.
Is has been you've seen that right across the state. It's been amazing.
Warren, to wrap up, there's whatever your view on climate change, there is no doubt that we're seeing more and more of these events and we're seeing them more frequently. What do you say to people about maintaining some positivity as we build that resilience to deal with the next event?
We also spoke, well, and we've spoken, I think, in this interview about the age of the farmer, and there's an aspect of, well, what's the use kind of at the moment because of the age of some of the farmers. They're very despondent. 70-plus-year-old farmers going, well, what's the point of rebuilding? I'm not going to be here. But trying to flip that and just say, well, you are still here, and you've still got the ability to drive that fence post into the ground and rebuild. It mightn't be the way that you thought it was going to be, but building that hope. And I've just done a post on socials this morning about the trees starting to bud. And, after this horrific event, and that just gives people hope that there is recovery is a process, and it's just there. It just needs a little bit of nurturing and help you along that way. And there is a lot of hope. One of the most hopeful things, or the most things that you can hang your hat on, is that community connectedness that has appeared directly after the fire, and the support that each other's given, and building on that gives that community hope to move forward. I think not individually, but as a group, and then so that rubs off on everybody if we can keep that positivity going.
Absolutely. Plug for your website, your podcast before we go.
So my website, mate, is www.theunbreakablefarmer.com.au, and my podcast is Beyond the Back Paddock, which is just a bit of a passion project of some really wonderful people that I've met along my speaking journey across Australia, and sharing a few of their stories. So it's it's a if you're looking for a technically savvy, polished thing rolling out of my podcast, you might need to look somewhere else. But as a dairy farmer, I don't make a bad podcaster.
I would agree. I think that there's nothing wrong with it, Warren. It's excellent, particularly a new series you're rolling out called Capacity Before Crisis. I would recommend to people. Warren, great to see you. Great to chat. Let's keep the positivity going, and hopefully we can have you back on VLGA Connect at some point.
Good on you, Chris. It's been great chatting with you.
It's Tony Raunic time. Tony's with us from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors here at VLGA Connect. Hello, Tony. What sort of a week are you having?
Been a busy week, Chris, but probably one of the highlights of the week was attending the Rural Council Victoria's Forum in the city of Melbourne on Wednesday. A full day of presentations, CFA, Chief Fire Officer, Department of Agriculture, etc. But then in the evening, the launch of RCV's state election platform, which was really well attended. The Minister, the Shadow Minister, various members of Parliament, members from various of the statutory authorities that service local government, but a really great alliance group who've got their act together in February. They're ready for that November election. They're very clear and strong advocates on what rural communities are after. And congrats to Rob Amos, the chair, and Kate Macon, the deputy chair, the two councillors from Campaspe and Corangamite, and that whole committee. I thought it was really well done. And if you're interested, Chris, or viewers, in having a look, what is RCV's state election platform? They post on LinkedIn, and I've reposted it myself. If you follow me on LinkedIn, then you'll see a link to their platform.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, all the alliance groups getting ready. It's going to be a long 9 months, I think. Tony,
And it's really in the mix,
yeah.
despite the big difference with recent events
Mm.
and you know, a government having been in power for a long time. Anything could happen, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what we want to talk about quickly today are two arbiter decisions which have come out in recent weeks. One of these was delivered last December, but only tabled at the first council meeting of the year. So it sort of makes me wonder, Tony, whether there might be more in the pipeline other than just these two.
I reckon you might be onto something, Chris. I think there might well be. I think we might see some more very interesting decisions coming out over the next couple of weeks.
All right, let's wait and see on that one. So these two affect Southern Grampians Shire and Greater Bendigo City Council. We probably don't have time to completely unpack the two of them. And of course, the decisions are online for anyone who wants to do that. But are there any common themes emerging from these arbiter outcomes? It's the same arbiter, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
which helps because the same sort of reasoning and thinking,
Yeah.
and as you say, some common themes. The first matter related to Southern Grampian Shire and allegations against Councillor Katrina Rainsford, and the second at Greater Bendigo, allegations against Councillor Owen Cosgriff. And in both cases, the councillors were found guilty or found to have breached the Model Code of Conduct, and there were sanctions involved. The common theme, though, as you refer to, Chris, was really behaviour that involved demeaning or insulting comments either towards another councillor or towards members of staff. The questioning in a public forum or in public commentary of a councillor or a staff member's motives or competence or professionalism, and inaccurate comments about council decisions and activities that was likely to diminish the public's confidence in council, misleading commentary on those council decisions and processes that was also likely to diminish the public's trust or confidence in the council. And that led to sanctions. Yeah,
and different levels of severity, obviously, because in the Southern Grampians case, we've got a 1 month suspension, but in the other, no suspension, but an apology.
Yeah, so I think what was the contrast there for me was that in the Southern Grampians case, Councillor Rainford, she didn't contest the allegation,
Right.
the various allegations largely, and she provided no alternative account of what she said or did. Instead, she relied on these general assertions of legitimate governance concerns and policy discussion advocacy and expressions of dissent, etc. And the arbiter didn't agree and found that there was a cumulative pattern of conduct here that required a 1 month suspension. In the case of Councillor Cosgriff at Greater Bendigo, not only did he put an alternative account of what occurred and what was motivating him, but the arbiter did comment that clearly he was very emotional and was very, had a very strong view about the Bendigo Writers Festival, which the behaviour, the conduct, the comments all concerned this Writers Festival that was originally to be held last year. Viewers would remember, Chris, there was some controversy around, I think, a code of conduct sort of protocol that writers and hosts were asked to sign, and guest speaking were asked to comply with this particular protocol and this particular definition of anti-Semitism. And that led to a whole number of listed guests and contributors indicating they wouldn't come, and ultimately the festival was cancelled. And Councillor Cosgriff made various comments at council meetings, at other briefings and forums that were indicating he was quite angry about that process and certain decisions council had made within that process. But nonetheless, his conduct, like Councillor Rainsford conduct in the other matter, involved him, talking over other councillors, ignoring the ruling of the mayor at the time. Now, the arbiter in Councillor Cosgriff's case, decided that an apology would be the appropriate sanction rather than a suspension.
Right. And Councillor Cosgriff has been quite vocal in public comments since, saying that this particular outcome, in his view, will have a chilling effect on robust political debate. And that's a theme that runs through these two, isn't it? What is robust political debate? What's acceptable? What do you see as the lessons coming from these?
Well, I think, Chris, I hear what Councillor Cosgriff says, but it will never be appropriate or defensible as robust political debate to say talk over the mayor who's trying to rule, to ignore the mayor's rulings on no, you've had your time, or that's not the matter before the meeting at the moment. For example, in Councillor Cosgriff's case, there was a meeting discussed the CEO's performance review, which became an opportunity for Councillor Cosgriff to take this approach about focusing largely on the Bendigo Riders Festival and his discontent with how that was managed, despite the rulings of the mayor that there was a need to move on. So yes, there is such a thing called a robust political debate, and we can disagree with each other in a respectful way, but we don't talk over each other. We don't ignore the rulings of the chair, and that was why the arbiter saw it was necessary for Councillor Cosgriff to make an apology here. And I think my view is that was the right decision. Now, I don't think that in any way that decision limits robust political debate. I mean, the points could have been made either at those meetings or in different fora without breaching the meeting, the rules of meeting procedure and the courtesies of running a meeting.
Another theme here, not just disputing mayor's rulings and meeting procedure, etc., but comments about the competence or the professionalism or the motives of council staff members came through here too. Yes,
and it's always like a case of stick to the facts and deal with the facts, and if you want to make a criticism of a decision or an opinion being expressed either by a member of the public, a councillor, a member of council staff, don't go to the personal, and don't also, we've seen prior decisions where the language used is don't use something you're not happy with as a springboard to like infer some overall failures at council, some overall inappropriate intentions, etc. So, or just incompetence. And I think that's a theme that occurred here in both instances, both at Southern Grampians and at Greater Bendigo. And I think that in both instances, the councils went a step too far here.
And goes to the issue of incivility, which is the topic for Fast Track next week, which is fully subscribed. I know you'll be there, Tony. Looking forward to hearing those discussions. So on those two matters, the Southern Grampians one tabled earlier this month. The suspension is now in effect. The Greater Bendigo one tabled earlier this month. The public apology to be given at the next council meeting in March, and those decisions are online if people want to dig into them. Thanks for the analysis of that, Tony. Before I let you go, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about that sector-leading move in Launceston towards a 4-day working week. You're probably not surprised to read this week that the council's backed away from that under extreme pressure, but also on the civility issues, what the CEO described as vitriolic abuse towards council staff in that public debate.
Yes, and Chris, congratulations to you and Local Government News. I was at the Rural Council of Victoria, that forum that day, as you know, on Wednesday, and in fact, one of the CEOs there said she read this on Local Government News. So we're getting our news feed of those really key stories through you, but really significant implications, I think, for Victoria. I think that I don't think the debate's over in relation to the 4-day week for 5-day pay, but clearly if that employment agreement had have got through at Launceston, there would have been considerable additional pressure through at councils that have Australian Services Union at least
Yeah.
memberships, to repeat that in Victoria. And yeah, I haven't followed all the detail, Chris, but did you say that that the CEO made some pronouncements about why that wasn't pursued?
Yes, yes, he did. Largely a lot of pressure from the business community,
Yeah.
a lot of pressure and abuse against council staff. I think perhaps some lessons learned here about the process. Even the mayor of Launceston has publicly said he felt it played out too much in public. While there is a process to go through, that should be respected and community conversations are needed. Perhaps the balance wasn't right. So I think if any other councils are thinking of going down that path, there's probably a bit of a checklist about how to manage that process that's come out of this particular instance.
That would be really useful, and I'll have a look at that myself, Chris. Really interesting.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. Great to speak as always. Thanks again to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers for their support for VLGA Connect. Looking forward to seeing you at Fast Track next week.
Will do. See you, Chris.
Fast Track 2026 is almost upon us. It's sold out, folks. We've got a packed house going to be tackling the subject of incivility next week. And we're very pleased to have with us today on the program Davies Wilson from Payble, who are the principal sponsor of Fast Track this year. Davies, lovely to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm well, and we're looking quite nice and bright for this wonderful podcast. So I'm excited for it.
Excellent. Good to have you here. You're the Chief Revenue Officer and the Chief Economist at Payble, which works with local governments Australia-wide. Tell us a bit more about what Payble does.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We've been working in the space for a few years now, and we help council lower their arrears through a payment experience platform. So it allows ratepayers to select payment terms that better suit their budget. And we also have an arrears management module, which allows councils to process hardship requests from ratepayers in compliance with the legislation that you heard about probably last week.
Yeah, we did. We did a segment on it. We'll come to that in just a moment, but I'm keen to know where you are because you're not just in Victoria. I'm right about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're actually across Australia and New Zealand now,
Right.
and we have over 55 councils that we're working with.
Right.
And I think we'd like to be at 100 by the end of the year. The growth is indicating that, and I think the market conditions are certainly conducive to many councils around Australia wanting to resolve some of these problems.
Dalis, I have to ask you, a little birdie tells me that you might have had a budding television career going there at one point. Were you on the Ellen DeGeneres show singing at a time?
Yeah, I tell everyone that I'm Australia's best D-grade celebrity, right? So a while back, my brother and I were lucky enough to go on the show, and after which we received a Warner Brothers contract. So other than looking at contracts in local government, I've had one of Ellen's ones in my hands. But yeah, I think it's much more stimulating now to be focused on this sector and utilizes more of my finance and economics background.
Well, that was my question. How do you go from there to working in the local government space?
I mean, the best part about local government is all of us listening come from a variety of different paths in life. And I think we all share one thing in common, and that's that we love our communities. And I think there's no better way for me. I'm a little bit selfish than most of you listening. You might focus on one council in particular. For instance, I'm lucky in that I get to work with so many. So it's great to travel across Australia and meet all the different people and stakeholders that are trying to make this country wonderful.
Terrific. So you mentioned the new ministerial guidelines that are in place in Victoria now with new requirements on councils in terms of how they deal with hardship cases in particular. You're not surprised to see these coming into force?
Not at all. And I think we've been talking about this extensively all the way since 2021. It was a prediction that my team and I made that arrears would actually skyrocket. And now we're seeing some pretty scary statistics coming through. So arrears across the state in Victoria now looks like it's going to be over $1 billion by the end of the year. It sits at 920 million at the moment. And the way in which that's growing is really, really intense. So we're looking at the average arrears rate for a council well over 11% now. So we felt that this was going to occur on the back of COVID because many ratepayers mistook an interest abatement as simply their entire rates notice being waived. And because there was no collections action, there was something we called an interest-free snowball that developed in the economy.
Yeah. Yes, Tony was talking about that on our show last week. How do you help councils respond to these new reforms? Does Payble have all of this factored into its solution?
Yeah, we'd like to say we do. We were the first ones to respond to the original Local Government Amendment Act in 2022, which sought to address these hardship concerns. And with Payble, you can actually construct completely compliant hardship payment plans within your council. And the way in which we do that is we allow ratepayers to suggest an amount that they can afford to pay. And if that amount meets council thresholds, it will be auto approved. If, however, it needs to be manually triaged, then it can be routed to the rates team or perhaps the collections team for approval. In addition, something that's really, really important is the ability to address arrears prior to it becoming a problem. So our solution has helpful reminders to help people stay on track. And the third tenet, which I think is really important, is bill smoothing or flexibility. So it's really difficult to calculate a rates payment balance, particularly with all the different input variables you have. So our solution allows people to pick an amount for the year and pay that overall amount in smaller portions. And what we also allow them to do is take that arrears balance from previous years and spread it over. So essentially the platform's working to get everyone back to zero and back on track.
Yeah, I guess any of those councils listening that haven't gone down the path yet of introducing those flexible options or still grappling with how they do it, they could do a lot worse than talk to you and your team at Payble about how to help that happen.
I hope so. And one fun thing that I feel is there's so many different savings that we explore throughout. For instance, most people don't know that common payment methods incur large costs to council, anywhere between $1 to $3 a payment. But for most councils, direct debit is free or less than a cent. So via our platform, they can pursue direct debits all the way up to 30 to 40%, whereas today only around 4 to 6% of their ratepayers would pay that way. And also getting people to pay in advance is a form of annuity. It means that council has the money now and they can start earning interest on it. So I think it's really interesting to see how this technology is disrupting things.
Absolutely. Well, you certainly know your stuff there, Dalis, and I'm sure there's folks who want to talk to you more about that. How's the best way to go about that? Go to the website for a start?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd direct them to is our research. So we've been producing reports every year, tracking arrears and putting out recommendations. I think on that website, you can find our arrears, particularly for Victoria, via a report. Another method is to kind of look at what other councils have done. So I think the story of Greater Dandenong is a really compelling one. We've been working with them for many years, and they've jumped from 38th in the state to 30th last year, based on some of the adoptions they've made. And Whitehorse is another good example, jumping from 33rd to 26th in the state. So what I'm really proud of is how the team is working to, alleviate this problem. And if they do really feel passionate, they can always reach out to our founder, Elliot, at ELLIOT at payble.com.au, or myself at DRW at payble.com.au.
And I noticed the resources and the case studies on your website are all there for people to have a look at. That's payble.com.au. Dalis, great to meet you, and thanks for explaining that to us. And thank you to you and the team there for your support of Fast Track this year.
We can't wait to be there, and I'll cover this in a little bit more detail at the conference. I'll see you there.
Excellent. Looking forward to meeting you in person. Dalis Wilson from Payble. Thank you to all of my guests on today's show. Warren Davies, inspirational to listen to and talk to. Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Mayor Steve Rabie at Mansfield. And of course, Davies from Pable. That's our show for another week. Next week, it's VLGA Fast Track happening on Friday. We'll have a special edition coming out of Fast Track in the days post that event. Look out for that. Don't forget to subscribe to VLGA Connect on YouTube and podcast to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time, thanks for watching or listening, and bye for now.